In the prestigious halls of Westmore University, Dr. John Washington submits his groundbreaking thesis on indigenous climate science. When Professor Victoria Kensington dismisses his work as unscientific folklore, John faces a critical choice. What Kensington doesn't know is that John Washington has a secret identity. He's M.J. Williams, the renowned author of the very textbook she teaches from. As discrimination escalates from mockery to threats, John meticulously documents everything. The prestigious Hammond Lecture becomes the perfect stage for a revelation that will shake academia to its core. One black professor, one shocking identity, one chance to expose the truth. White professor mocks black student's thesis, discovers he wrote the textbook she's teaching from. Do you think John should have revealed his identity sooner? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Dr. John Washington sat in the back corner of the crowded campus cafe, his eyes fixed on the laptop screen where his nearly completed doctoral thesis glowed back at him. At 45, John was older than most PhD candidates at Westmore University, but his path had been anything but conventional. After 20 years as a respected anthropologist with groundbreaking field research across 5 continents, he had decided to formalize his expertise with a doctorate. The cafe hummed with the energy of students rushing to complete assignments before midterms. John sipped his coffee, reviewing his thesis on indigenous knowledge systems and climate adaptation, cross-cultural solutions. His work challenged conventional Western approaches to climate science by integrating traditional ecological knowledge from communities he'd worked with for decades. "John, there you are," called Professor James Chen, his thesis advisor, weaving through the tables. "Been looking everywhere for you." John closed his laptop, just putting the finishing touches on Chapter 6. Professor Chen slid into the seat across from him. "That's actually why I wanted to find you. There's been a change with your thesis committee." John felt a flutter of concern. "What kind of change?" "Dr. Harmon is on medical leave. They've assigned Dr. Victoria Kensington to replace him." The name landed like a stone in John's stomach. Dr. Kensington was notorious in the department, brilliant but caustic, with clear biases about what constituted legitimate academic work. Her dismissive attitude toward non-Western knowledge systems was well known. "James, she's published critiques directly opposing my methodology. She literally wrote an article calling traditional ecological knowledge anecdotal folklore masquerading as science." Professor Chen nodded grimly. "I fought it, but the department chair insisted. She's the only senior faculty member with availability." He lowered his voice. "Between us, I think Dean Phillips wants to make your path difficult. Your work challenges too many established theories, including some that have brought significant grants to the university." John rubbed his temples. 20 years in the field hadn't prepared him for academic politics. "When do I meet with her?" "Tomorrow. Preliminary thesis review at 3 p.m. in her office." After Professor Chen left, John opened his computer again and searched for Dr. Kensington's recent publications. He needed to understand his opponent's thinking. The most recent result was her syllabus for Climate Science Methodology 501, the graduate seminar she taught. John scrolled through the reading list, then froze. Listed as the primary textbook was Modern Approaches to Environmental Adaptation by M.J. Williams. A smile slowly spread across John's face. M.J. Williams was his pen name, an homage to his grandparents, Martin and Josephine, who had raised him after his parents died. The textbook, published 5 years ago, had become standard in the field, but he'd maintained his anonymity in academic circles, publishing under the pseudonym to separate his practical fieldwork from his theoretical contributions. Dr. Kensington had been teaching from his book for years without knowing it. John packed up his laptop, his mind racing with possibilities. Tomorrow's meeting with Dr. Kensington would be interesting indeed. He wouldn't reveal his identity immediately. That card was too valuable to play early. Instead, he would observe, understand her prejudices firsthand, and document everything. If she was determined to judge his work unfairly, he would need evidence for an appeal. As he walked across campus toward his small apartment, autumn leaves crunching beneath his feet, John's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Amara. "Dad, how's the thesis coming? Still on track for graduation? Mom and I are booking tickets for May." John smiled, thinking of his ex-wife Layla and their daughter, both so proud of his return to academia. Despite their divorce 15 years ago, they had remained a supportive family unit. "Still on track," he texted back. "Just met an interesting new challenge. We'll call you tonight with details." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, determination settling over him like armor. Dr. Kensington might be an obstacle, but she wouldn't be the first barrier he'd overcome. And unlike those in the past, this one had unknowingly been studying his work for years. Tomorrow would only be the opening move in a game she didn't yet know they were playing. At precisely 2:55 p.m., John stood outside Dr. Kensington's office in Westmore's prestigious Hammond Hall. The weathered oak door displayed a brass nameplate and an impressive list of credentials. John straightened his navy blazer, checked that his notebook and laptop were in his messenger bag, and knocked precisely at 3:00 p.m. "Enter," came a clipped voice from within. Dr. Victoria Kensington's office reflected her reputation for rigid organization. Bookshelves lined the walls with alphabetically arranged texts. Her desk was meticulously ordered, and framed degrees hung in perfect alignment. The professor herself, a woman in her early 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, didn't look up from her computer as John entered. "Mr. Washington, I presume, take a seat." She gestured to a chair without making eye contact. "Dr. Washington, actually," John corrected gently. "I completed my first doctorate at Oxford 20 years ago." This caught her attention. She looked up, her pale blue eyes scrutinizing him through narrow glasses. "Yet here you are pursuing another. How unusual." "My first was in cultural anthropology. This one focuses on environmental science with emphasis on indigenous climate adaptation techniques." Dr. Kensington's lips thinned slightly. "Yes, I've reviewed your proposal." "That's precisely what we need to discuss." She picked up a printed copy of his thesis draft, marked extensively with red ink. "Your work contains fundamental methodological flaws." John maintained a neutral expression. "I'd appreciate your specific concerns. For starters, you're treating oral traditions and tribal practices as equivalent to peer-reviewed scientific data." She tapped a section of his paper. "Here you claim that the Navajo drought prediction methods have validity comparable to meteorological models. That's simply not supportable." John nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, when tested against historical climate records, these methods show 78% accuracy over a 200-year period. That's documented in Appendix C. "Coincidental correlation at best," she dismissed. "Indigenous knowledge may be culturally valuable, but it lacks the rigor of scientific methodology." John opened his laptop. "May I show you something relevant to this discussion?" Dr. Kensington checked her watch impatiently. "Briefly." He pulled up a PDF of a peer-reviewed study he'd published last year in the Journal of Climate Science. This study conducted a 10-year comparison between Western predictive models and indigenous methods across 4 continents. The indigenous approaches outperformed standard models in localized predictions by an average of 23%. She scanned the document, frowning. "This contradicts established literature in the field." "Not exactly," John replied calmly. "It actually builds upon foundations established in several works, including," he paused deliberately, "Professor M.J. Williams' textbook on environmental adaptation. The one you use in your 501 seminar." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she regained composure. "Williams acknowledges traditional knowledge as historically interesting, but maintains that modern scientific approaches represent our best path forward." John struggled not to smile. "I believe Williams argues for integration rather than replacement. Chapter 4 specifically states that indigenous knowledge systems offer complementary insights that, when properly analyzed and incorporated, strengthen rather than weaken scientific rigor." Dr. Kensington's eyes narrowed. "You've memorized Williams' work." "I find it compelling," John replied simply. She set his thesis down. "Regardless, your methodology doesn't meet this department's standards. I'll be recommending substantial revisions before this can proceed to defense." John made notes in his journal. "What specific revisions would you suggest?" "For starters, reframe indigenous knowledge as anthropological context rather than data, remove claims of equivalence to established scientific methods, and integrate proper climate modeling instead of relying on these." She waved her hand dismissively. "Cultural practices." John continued writing. "That would fundamentally alter the thesis of my work." "Precisely," she smiled thinly. "The current thesis is indefensible." John closed his notebook. "I respectfully disagree, Dr. Kensington. My methodology follows established cross-disciplinary approaches recognized at institutions including Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford. Not at Westmore." She stood, signaling the meeting's end. "You have 2 weeks to submit revisions, or I'll recommend termination of your candidacy." John remained seated. "University policy allows for committee member substitution in cases of irreconcilable methodological disagreements." "Good luck with that. Dean Phillips personally approved my appointment to your committee." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. 2 weeks, Dr. Washington." As John gathered his belongings, he noticed her copy of Williams' textbook on her shelf, heavily annotated with sticky notes. "I see you're quite familiar with Williams' work." "It's the definitive text in the field," she said, pride evident in her voice. "I was among the first to incorporate it into graduate curriculum." John nodded. "Fascinating. I wonder if you've ever had the opportunity to discuss it with the author." "Williams is notoriously private. No one in academia has direct contact with him." She adjusted her glasses. "Though I've published several papers expanding on his theories." I'll have to look those up, John said, stepping toward the door. Thank you for your time, Dr. Kensington. Outside her office, John exhaled slowly. The meeting had gone exactly as he'd expected. He pulled out his phone and dialed Professor Chen. James, we need to talk. Can you meet me at Riverside Cafe in 30 minutes? As he walked across campus, John began mentally drafting an email to his publisher. After 5 years of anonymity, it might be time for M.J. Williams to make a public appearance after all. Professor James Chen nearly spilled his tea when John explained the situation at Riverside Cafe. You're M.J. Williams, the M.J. Williams, he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one overheard. That textbook is cited in over 70% of climate science publications in the last 3 years. John nodded. I've maintained the pseudonym to separate my theoretical work from my field research. It's allowed me to publish without the bias that sometimes comes with being. He gestured to himself, a black researcher challenging predominantly white institutional frameworks. Professor Chen leaned back, and Kensington has no idea she's been teaching from your book for years. None, John sipped his coffee. The question is how to proceed strategically. Revealing my identity immediately might feel satisfying but wouldn't address the systemic issues at play. Chen's expression turned serious. This goes beyond Kensington. Dean Phillips has been pushing faculty to prioritize research that attracts corporate funding. Your work advocates for community-based approaches that corporations can't easily monetize. John opened his laptop and created a new document. Then we document everything systematically. I need to build a case that demonstrates clear bias while ensuring my work meets every legitimate academic standard. Strategic Response Plan. 1. Document all interactions with Dr. Kensington. 2. Compile faculty endorsements from other institutions. 3. Prepare formal methodological defense backed by published research. 4. Secure additional external committee member, if possible. 5. Develop contingency for revealing M.J. Williams' identity. I'll help where I can, Chen promised, but tread carefully. The administration values Kensington's connections to funding sources. Over the next week, John implemented his plan methodically. He contacted colleagues at other universities who provided written endorsements of his methodology. He documented every email exchange with Dr. Kensington, noting her dismissive language and inconsistent criticisms. On Thursday, an unexpected opportunity arose. The department announced that Dr. M.J. Williams had accepted an invitation to deliver the prestigious Hammond Lecture the following month. The topic, Integrating Indigenous Knowledge into Climate Science. John stared at the announcement email, then called his publisher, Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, did you arrange this? Good morning to you too, John, she laughed. Yes, I did. Your request to increase M.J. Williams' public profile came at the perfect time. Westmore has been trying to get you Williams for their lecture series for years. Did they specify a particular topic? No, they just wanted the renowned M.J. Williams. I suggested the indigenous knowledge focus since it's your current passion. Is that a problem? John smiled slowly. Not at all. It's perfect timing, actually. That afternoon, John received an email from Dr. Kensington. Copy. From V. Kensington at Westmore Edu. To M. Washington at Westmore Edu. Subject, required attendance, Hammond Lecture. Dr. Washington. All doctoral candidates are required to attend the upcoming Hammond Lecture by M.J. Williams. Given your insistence on methodologies similar to Williams, perhaps hearing directly from the authority in the field will clarify where your work diverges from acceptable standards. I expect a 2-page reflection paper following the lecture, addressing how Williams' presentation either supports or refutes your methodological choices. Dr. Victoria Kensington. Chair, Climate Science Department. John forwarded the email to Professor Chen with the comment, "Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor." On Friday afternoon, John was reviewing research in the graduate lounge when he overheard 2 faculty members discussing the upcoming lecture. Kensington is beside herself with excitement, said Professor Rivera from the economics department. She's hosting a private dinner for Williams after the lecture. I heard she's prepared a detailed critique of his latest chapter on traditional ecological knowledge, replied Dr. Patel. Apparently she disagrees with his growing emphasis on non-Western methodologies. Brave move, Professor Rivera chuckled, challenging Williams to his face. John typed a quick note in his phone, prepare dinner talking points. Later that evening, as John cooked dinner in his apartment, he received a video call from his daughter Amara. Dad, how's the thesis drama? Her bright face filled the screen. At 24, she was completing her own master's degree in environmental law. It's evolving into something quite interesting, John replied, filling her in on the developments with Dr. Kensington and the upcoming lecture. Amara's eyes widened. You're going to reveal yourself at the lecture? That's like an academic mic drop. I haven't decided yet, John said. It needs to be about more than just proving her wrong. This is an opportunity to address broader issues in how indigenous knowledge is valued or devalued in academia. You should document everything, Amara advised. This could become a case study on bias in academic institutions. Already on it, John replied. Professor Chen is helping me build a comprehensive record. After they hung up, John received an email notification. Dr. Kensington had scheduled another thesis review meeting for Monday morning. The subject line read, Final opportunity for thesis redirection. John took a deep breath and updated his strategic response document. Monday's meeting would require perfect composure. He would continue documenting everything while maintaining professional dignity. The Hammond Lecture was 3 weeks away. Until then, he would need to navigate Dr. Kensington's attempts to discredit his work while preparing for a revelation that would reshape his academic identity forever. Monday arrived with a steady rain that drummed against the windows of Hammond Hall. John entered Dr. Kensington's office at precisely 9 a.m., carrying a portfolio containing his unchanged thesis, supplementary documentation, and letters of support from colleagues at 3 prestigious universities. Dr. Kensington sat behind her desk, a printed copy of John's thesis now covered with even more red markings than before. Her assistant, a nervous-looking graduate student named Tyler, sat in the corner with a laptop, apparently there to take notes. Dr. Washington, Kensington began without preamble, I see you've made no revisions to your thesis despite my clear directives. John placed his portfolio on the desk. I've prepared a methodological defense that addresses each of your concerns with supporting evidence from peer-reviewed literature. Including your own documentation is unnecessary. I've conducted a thorough literature review. She tapped a stack of papers. The consensus clearly supports my position. John nodded to Tyler. Is he recording our meeting? Mr. Green is documenting our conversation for departmental records, she replied. Standard procedure for cases of academic dispute. Then I'd like the record to show that I've brought supporting documentation from Dr. Alina Chang at Harvard, Dr. Samuel Acaffer at Oxford, and Dr. Janine Wilson at Stanford, all confirming that my methodology meets the highest standards in the field. Tyler's fingers paused over the keyboard as Dr. Kensington's expression hardened. Outside opinions are irrelevant to Westmore's standards, she said. As I explained previously, your approach fundamentally misunderstands the hierarchy of knowledge systems. Indigenous practices may be culturally significant, but they cannot be elevated to the level of scientific methodology. John maintained a calm demeanor. Dr. Kensington, would you agree that empirical evidence should be the ultimate arbiter of methodological validity? Of course, she replied with a dismissive wave. That's precisely why anecdotal cultural practices fail to meet the standard. Then I'd like to direct your attention to Appendix D of my thesis. John opened his copy and turned it toward her. This contains a 25-year longitudinal comparison of drought prediction accuracy between the U.S. weather service models and combined indigenous methodologies from 3 tribal nations. The indigenous approaches demonstrated 83% accuracy compared to 79% from conventional models. Dr. Kensington barely glanced at the data. Correlation is not causation, Dr. Washington. Without proper controls, these results are meaningless. The study includes matched controls across all test conditions, John pointed out. If you'll look at Table 4, you'll see. I'm familiar with how to read a data table, she interrupted. The fundamental issue remains you're attempting to legitimize folklore as science. John took a measured breath. Dr. Kensington, do you consider M.J. Williams' work to be scientifically sound? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Obviously, Williams is the preeminent authority in our field. I ask because Williams' 2018 paper in Nature Climate Review explicitly states that indigenous knowledge systems represent a parallel and complementary approach to understanding climate patterns, and in many cases provide insights unavailable through conventional Western scientific methods. Dr. Kensington's face flushed slightly. Williams contextualizes those statements within a broader framework that you're conveniently ignoring. Tyler looked increasingly uncomfortable as he continued typing. Actually, John continued, Williams devotes an entire chapter in the textbook you teach from to the methodology I'm employing. Chapter 7, Integration of Knowledge Systems, outlines precisely the approach I've taken. You're misinterpreting Williams' work, she snapped, her composure slipping. And this discussion is becoming circular. My decision stands. Without fundamental revisions, your thesis cannot proceed to defense. John remained calm. University policy allows me to request a blind review by an external committee member if there's an irreconcilable methodological dispute. Request denied, she said instantly. Dean Phillips has already approved my assessment. John nodded, having expected this response. Then I'll need to appeal directly to the Academic Standards Committee. That would be unwise. Her tone turned threateningly soft. Academic communities are smaller than you might think, Dr. Washington. Your reputation would not survive challenging established authorities in the field. John locked eyes with her. Are you threatening my academic career, Dr. Kensington? Tyler's typing stopped completely, his wide eyes darting between them. Dr. Kensington smiled coldly. Simply offering professional advice. There's no shame in redirecting your research to something more suitable. I'd like the record to reflect that Dr. Kensington has implied professional retaliation if I pursue legitimate academic appeals procedures, John said clearly, looking directly at Tyler. That is not what I. It's exactly what you implied, John interrupted, his calm finally breaking. And it demonstrates precisely the institutional bias that has marginalized indigenous knowledge systems for generations. You're not rejecting my methodology on scientific grounds, you're rejecting it because it challenges your cultural and academic assumptions about what constitutes legitimate knowledge. The room fell silent except for the rain against the windows. This meeting is over, Dr. Kensington said finally. Tyler, stop recording. Actually, Tyler, please continue, John said. I'd like to formally request that this meeting's notes be preserved as evidence for my appeal to the Academic Standards Committee. Tyler looked to Dr. Kensington, then back to John, conflict evident on his face. Dr. Kensington stood abruptly. You're making a serious mistake, Dr. Washington. Your obstinance will only damage your prospects. John gathered his materials. My commitment to intellectual integrity will determine my prospects, Dr. Kensington. He turned to Tyler. Please email me a copy of those notes by end of day. As John reached the door, Dr. Kensington called after him. Don't forget the Hammond Lecture next week. I'll expect your reflection paper on how Williams contradicts your approach. John paused in the doorway. I'm looking forward to hearing Williams' perspective, he said, then walked out, his heart pounding despite his outward composure. Outside, Professor Chen was waiting in the hallway, concern evident on his face. How did it go? Asked quietly as they walked toward the exit. Exactly as expected, John replied. She's escalated to implied threats now. That's actually good, Chen said, surprising John. The more she reveals her bias, the stronger your case becomes. Tyler was recording everything, John added, though I doubt those notes will make it to me without some creative editing. Don't worry about that, Chen said with a small smile. I have contacts on the IT staff. Nothing truly disappears from university servers. As they exited into the rain, John looked back at Hammond Hall. 1 week until the lecture. Time to prepare MJ Williams for his first public appearance. The week before the Hammond Lecture passed in a blur of strategic preparation. John divided his time between strengthening his academic defense and preparing for his revelation as MJ Williams. On Tuesday morning, Tyler sent the meeting notes from his session with Dr. Kensington. As John suspected, they had been heavily sanitized, all mentions of implied threats removed, replaced with benign academic disagreements. As expected, John told Professor Chen as they reviewed the document in Chen's office, but we have something she doesn't know about. Chen smiled and turned his laptop to show John an email from Westmore's IT department. The original audio recording is now safely preserved on 3 separate servers. John nodded appreciatively. And my appeal to the Academic Standards Committee, officially filed yesterday. They've scheduled a preliminary review for next Thursday, 2 days after the Hammond Lecture. John opened his notebook where he'd been drafting his lecture as MJ Williams. Perfect timing. While John worked on his presentation, word of his methodological dispute with Dr. Kensington spread through the department. Graduate students began approaching him discreetly, sharing similar experiences of having their research devalued when it challenged conventional Western frameworks. She told me my comparative study of Ghanaian agricultural techniques wasn't rigorous enough, confided Nadia, a third-year doctoral student. But when Palmer wrote almost the identical study using European techniques, she praised his methodology. John carefully documented each account, building a pattern of systemic bias that extended well beyond his individual case. On Friday afternoon, Dr. Kensington sent a department-wide email announcing a special reception following the Hammond Lecture, where select faculty and doctoral candidates would have the opportunity to meet with MJ Williams. Attendance is by invitation only, the email emphasized. Invitees have been selected based on academic alignment with Williams' work. John received no invitation. That's actually hilarious, Professor Chen said when John showed him the email. She's excluding MJ Williams from meeting with MJ Williams. It's also perfect, John replied. The reception provides exactly the right setting for the revelation. Throughout the weekend, John finalized his lecture while his publisher Sarah worked behind the scenes, coordinating with sympathetic faculty members who would ensure John could access the reception despite Dr. Kensington's exclusion. On Monday morning, John received an unexpected visitor at his campus apartment, his ex-wife Layla. "Surprise," she called as he opened the door. "Amara told me about your academic showdown. I couldn't miss this." Despite their divorce 15 years earlier, Layla had remained his closest friend and strongest supporter. As a civil rights attorney, she understood institutional power dynamics intimately. "You're planning to reveal yourself at the lecture?" she asked as they walked across campus. John shook his head. "At the reception afterward. The lecture itself needs to stand on its content, not the revelation. I want everyone to hear and accept the methodological arguments before they know who's making them." Layla nodded approvingly. "Smart. So what's your game plan for handling the aftermath? This will send shockwaves through your department." "I've documented everything meticulously. Professor Chen has secured the unedited meeting recordings. And my appeal to the Academic Standards Committee includes testimonials from other students who have experienced similar discrimination." "Good," Layla said. "But remember, institutions protect themselves first. Be prepared for backlash." As they reached the entrance to the science building, John spotted Dr. Kensington emerging with Dean Phillips. Their conversation looked intense. "That's her," Layla whispered. "The one gesturing dramatically?" John nodded. "Along with Dean Phillips, her administrative protector." Layla observed them with a lawyer's calculating gaze. "Their body language suggests they're under pressure. Word of your appeal must be circulating." That evening, John received a text from Professor Chen. "Kay just submitted urgent request to Academic Standards Committee to expedite your thesis rejection before tomorrow's lecture, claiming academic integrity concerns. Committee refused her request." John showed the message to Layla. "She's panicking," Layla said. "She knows your methodology aligns with Williams and wants to reject you before that becomes obvious to everyone." "Which only strengthens my case," John replied, making a final note in his documentation file. As midnight approached, John finalized his presentation slides. The lecture would methodically validate indigenous knowledge systems through empirical evidence, directly addressing each criticism Dr. Kensington had raised against his thesis, without ever mentioning his specific case. His phone chimed with an email notification. Dr. Kensington had sent a final reminder about the required reflection paper following the lecture. "Be sure to analyze how Williams' presentation supports or refutes your methodological choices," she wrote. "This will be critical to any reconsideration of your thesis status." John smiled at the irony, then closed his laptop. Tomorrow would be one of the most important days of his academic career, the day MJ Williams would finally step out from behind the pseudonym and confront the biases that had made that pseudonym necessary in the first place. "Ready for tomorrow?" Layla asked from the doorway of his study. "As ready as I'll ever be," John replied, setting his alarm for 6 a.m. Hammond Hall's main auditorium reached capacity an hour before the scheduled lecture. Faculty, students, and visitors from neighboring universities filled every seat, with latecomers standing against the walls. The annual Hammond Lecture was always well attended, but MJ Williams' rare public appearance had transformed it into a major academic event. John arrived early, carrying a leather portfolio containing his presentation materials. He wore a charcoal suit with a subtle green tie, professional but understated. Layla and Professor Chen accompanied him, providing both moral support and strategic coverage. "Dr. Kensington is by the entrance with Dean Phillips," Chen murmured. "They're checking names against the reception list." John nodded. "Let's use the side door. I've already given the AV team my presentation slides." They slipped in through the faculty entrance, finding seats in the middle section where John would be visible but not conspicuous. From this vantage point, he could observe Dr. Kensington greeting distinguished guests near the podium. At precisely 7 p.m., Dean Phillips approached the microphone. "Welcome to the 43rd Annual Hammond Lecture. Tonight, we are privileged to host one of the most influential voices in climate science, Dr. MJ Williams." He continued with a glowing introduction highlighting achievements that John had accomplished under his pseudonym, his groundbreaking textbook, his Nature publications, his influence on climate policy across 4 continents. "And now," Dean Phillips concluded, "I invite Dr. Victoria Kensington, chair of our Climate Science Department, to introduce tonight's speaker." Dr. Kensington approached the podium with unmistakable pride. "For years, MJ Williams has shaped the theoretical foundations of our field," she began. "His work represents the gold standard of methodological rigor and scientific excellence." John carefully documented her exact phrasing in his notebook. "While we've never had the privilege of meeting Dr. Williams in person until today," Kensington continued, "his influence permeates every aspect of our curriculum. His textbook Modern Approaches to Environmental Adaptation sits on my desk, worn from constant reference." She detailed Williams' achievements, emphasizing his traditionalist scientific approach. a characterization that made John smile, knowing it directly contradicted the content of his upcoming lecture. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming the preeminent voice in climate science methodology, Dr. M.J. Williams. The audience applauded enthusiastically as John remained seated. After a moment of confusion, a middle-aged white man in the front row stood and approached the podium. John recognized him immediately, Dr. Robert Collins, his publisher's husband, who had agreed to play the role of M.J. Williams until the strategic moment of revelation. Dr. Collins adjusted the microphone. Thank you for that generous introduction. Before I begin my presentation, I must clarify that I am not M.J. Williams. A confused murmur spread through the audience. I am Dr. Robert Collins, representing Meridian Academic Press. The real Dr. Williams asked me to begin today's proceedings with an important announcement. Dr. Kensington's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she half rose from her seat in the front row. For professional reasons, Dr. Williams has maintained anonymity for many years, Collins continued. Today that changes. The author has decided it's time to step forward and personally present this important work. He gestured toward the middle of the auditorium. Dr. John Washington, would you please join me on stage? A shocked silence fell over the room as John stood. He could feel hundreds of eyes following him as he walked calmly to the podium, including Dr. Kensington's wide-eyed stare of disbelief. Thank you, Dr. Collins, John said as he reached the podium. Good evening, everyone. I am M.J. Williams. The audience erupted in surprised conversation. John waited for the noise to subside before continuing. For 20 years, I've conducted field research across 5 continents, documenting indigenous climate adaptation strategies. When I began publishing my theoretical work, I chose a pseudonym to ensure the ideas would be evaluated on their merits, without preconceptions based on my identity or background. John made eye contact with Dr. Kensington, whose face had drained of color. Tonight's lecture is titled Integrating Indigenous Knowledge into Climate Science, Empirical Validation of Traditional Ecological Approaches. I'll present conclusive evidence that indigenous knowledge systems provide not only valid, but often superior methodologies for understanding climate patterns and developing adaptation strategies. For the next 45 minutes, John delivered a masterclass in methodological integration. He presented data sets, case studies, and longitudinal analyses, systematically dismantling each criticism Dr. Kensington had made of his thesis. Without ever mentioning her by name, he addressed every objection she had raised, using the very language from their documented meetings. Throughout the presentation, John maintained professional composure, focusing on the science rather than the personal revelation. He concluded with a call for academic institutions to examine their biases against non-Western knowledge systems. The empirical evidence is clear, he stated in closing. When we elevate indigenous methodologies to their rightful place alongside conventional Western approaches, we achieve more accurate, more nuanced understanding of our changing climate. Thank you. The applause was immediate and thunderous. Faculty members rose to their feet, followed by students and visitors. Even Dean Phillips joined the standing ovation, though he appeared deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting frequently to Dr. Kensington, who remained seated, rigid with shock. The Q&A session that followed was electric. Scholars from multiple institutions asked probing questions about John's methodology, which he answered with the confidence of someone who had developed the definitive framework in the field. Dr. Williams or Dr. Washington, began one faculty member, why reveal your identity now after all these years? John paused thoughtfully. Academic knowledge should be evaluated on its merits, not its source. Unfortunately, that ideal isn't always reality. My experience as both M.J. Williams and John Washington has revealed a troubling double standard. The same methodological approaches celebrated under one name were dismissed under another. His gaze found Dr. Kensington. This inconsistency highlights systemic problems we must address. Knowledge doesn't become more or less valid based on who presents it. As the formal lecture concluded, John gathered his materials. Dean Phillips approached quickly, his practiced smile betraying nervous energy. Dr. Washington, a remarkable presentation. We'd be honored if you'd join us for the reception. Thank you, Dean Phillips. I believe Dr. Kensington didn't include me on the invitation list, but I'd be delighted to attend. The dean's smile faltered. A simple oversight, I'm sure. Please follow me. As they moved toward the reception hall, John spotted Dr. Kensington speaking urgently with several senior faculty members, gesturing emphatically. When she saw John approaching with the dean, she abruptly excused herself and headed directly toward them. The climactic confrontation John had prepared for was about to begin. The Hammond Hall reception area buzzed with animated conversations as faculty members and distinguished guests processed the evening's revelation. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the elegant space, where waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. John entered flanked by Dean Phillips and Professor Chen. Conversations paused as attendees turned to observe the newly revealed M.J. Williams. Layla positioned herself strategically near the entrance, her attorney's instincts on full alert. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dean Phillips announced with forced enthusiasm, "please welcome Dr. John Washington, or as we now know him, M.J. Williams." Applause broke out, followed by a surge of academics eager to speak with John. For 15 minutes, he navigated conversations with colleagues who had suddenly discovered newfound respect for his work. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same ideas they now praised had been dismissed when presented under his own name. Dr. Kensington remained at the periphery, engaged in intense conversations with senior faculty members. Her glances toward John alternated between disbelief and calculation. Professor Chen leaned in close. "She's regrouping, trying to salvage her position," John nodded. "Documentation ready?" "Everything's in place," Chen confirmed. After 20 minutes of strategic networking, John deliberately moved toward the center of the room, positioning himself where confrontation with Dr. Kensington would be publicly visible. The moment arrived when a visiting professor asked about his thesis work. "Actually, my doctoral thesis here at Westmore applies the same methodologies I outlined in tonight's lecture," John explained, his voice carrying. "It's currently under review by the department." Dr. Kensington could no longer avoid the encounter. She approached with Dean Phillips, her composure partially restored. "Dr. Washington," she began with a tight smile, "or should I say Dr. Williams, a remarkable presentation. Of course, had I known your identity, our thesis discussions would have taken a different direction." John maintained a professional tone. "Would they, Dr. Kensington? The methodologies in my thesis are identical to those in my published work you've described tonight as the gold standard of methodological rigor." Faculty members nearby fell silent, sensing the academic confrontation unfolding. "Context is everything in academia," she replied smoothly. "Your thesis lacked the comprehensive framework found in your published work." "My thesis contains direct citations to Williams' publications," John countered. "In fact, Chapter 4 addresses the specific methodological concerns you raised in our meetings." Dean Phillips intervened. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for—" "Actually," Professor Chen interjected, stepping forward with a tablet, "this is precisely the right venue to address academic inconsistency." He turned to the gathering crowd. "With Dr. Washington's permission, I'd like to share something relevant." John nodded his approval. Chen displayed the tablet screen, showing a side-by-side comparison of Dr. Kensington's criticisms of John's thesis and her published praise of identical methodologies in M.J. Williams' work. "On the left," Chen explained, "are Dr. Kensington's comments calling indigenous methodologies anecdotal folklore masquerading as science when reviewing Dr. Washington's thesis. On the right, her published paper praising the same approaches as groundbreaking methodological integration when attributed to M.J. Williams." Murmurs spread through the gathering academics. Dr. Kensington's face flushed. "This is an outrageous ambush. These statements are taken out of context." "We have the complete records," John said calmly, "including unedited recordings of our thesis meetings." Dean Phillips stepped closer to Dr. Kensington, whispering urgently in her ear. The power dynamic had visibly shifted. A distinguished professor from MIT who had been observing the exchange spoke up. "If I understand correctly, Dr. Kensington rejected methodologies in your thesis that she simultaneously praised in your published work." "Not just praised," John clarified. "Taught to her students as definitive approaches." The MIT professor shook her head. "That represents a serious breach of academic integrity." Dr. Kensington attempted to regain control. "Dean Phillips, this public interrogation is completely inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" Layla interjected, stepping forward, "is requiring students to meet standards that shift based on their identity." "And you are?" Dr. Kensington demanded. "Layla Washington, civil rights attorney," she smiled coolly. "Here as an observer, though my firm specializes in institutional discrimination cases." The implied threat hung in the air. Dean Phillips cleared his throat nervously. "Dr. Washington, I believe we should continue this discussion in my office tomorrow morning. I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstandings regarding your thesis status." John remained focused on Dr. Kensington. "My thesis uses methodologies that represent the current consensus in our field, a consensus you've publicly endorsed through your teaching of my textbook. The only misunderstanding is why these approaches were deemed inadequate when presented under my own name." Dr. Kensington finally abandoned pretense. "Your work lacks objectivity. You have a personal investment in elevating indigenous approaches because of your field experiences." "All scientists have perspectives shaped by their experiences," John replied. The question is whether the methodology stands up to empirical scrutiny. The evidence I presented tonight, the same evidence in my thesis, passes that test conclusively. The room had grown silent, the academic confrontation now the central focus of the reception. This isn't just about my thesis, John continued, addressing the gathered academics. It's about patterns of bias that determine whose knowledge is valued and whose is dismissed. My situation is one example among many. On cue, several graduate students stepped forward, those who had shared their experiences with John over the past week. Dr. Kensington rejected my research on traditional Mexican farming techniques as insufficiently scientific, stated Miguel, a fourth-year doctoral candidate. The same techniques were later approved when studied by my white colleague. One by one, they shared similar stories, painting a pattern of systemic bias that transcended John's individual case. Dean Phillips, sensing the mounting public relations disaster, took decisive action. Dr. Washington, your thesis will proceed to defense with an expanded committee including external reviewers. Dr. Kensington will discuss departmental review procedures tomorrow morning. Dr. Kensington's facade finally cracked. This is absurd. He deliberately deceived the entire academic community with his pseudonym for years. A pseudonym that became necessary precisely because of biases like those on display tonight, John replied evenly. The reception concluded with Dean Phillips announcing a comprehensive review of departmental practices and the formation of a committee on inclusivity in academic evaluation, with John invited to serve as a founding member. 2 weeks later, John successfully defended his thesis before a committee that included 3 external reviewers from Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford. He received unanimous approval with commendation for methodological innovation. Dr. Kensington was removed as department chair following an internal investigation that revealed a pattern of discriminatory evaluation practices. While she retained her professorship, she was required to complete extensive bias training and was placed under supervision for future graduate committee work. Most importantly, Westmore University established the Williams Initiative for Methodological Diversity, a program dedicated to integrating indigenous and non-Western knowledge systems into scientific curriculum across departments. On graduation day, as John prepared to receive his second doctoral degree, he reflected on the journey. His daughter Amara and ex-wife Layla sat in the audience, their faces beaming with pride. Dr. Washington. He turned to find Tyler, Dr. Kensington's former assistant, approaching in graduation regalia. "I wanted to thank you," Tyler said. "After everything that happened, my thesis on indigenous water conservation techniques was approved last week. The new evaluation guidelines made all the difference." John smiled. "That's what this was all about, Tyler, creating space for knowledge that deserves to be recognized." As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, John knew the revelation of M.J. Williams' identity had accomplished something far more significant than personal vindication. It had struck a blow against institutional bias and opened doors for countless scholars whose valuable work might otherwise have been dismissed. The applause that followed him across the stage celebrated not just his individual achievement, but a meaningful step toward academic justice.